Namo tassa, excuse me, Namo, sometimes I forget the right rhythm. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. That's the Sri Lankan way. It's not my special rhythm. Okay, never mind. Okay, so today we are taking Sutta number 111 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called Anupada Sutta. It was translated the title was translated very freely by Venerable Nyanamoli as one by one as they occurred. I don't know his reason for translating the title in that way. Okay, this is a sutta which I have to say I suspect is a later addition to the Sutta Pitaka. And there are certain reasons for that, for making that assessment. One is that there's no counterpart to the sutta in the Chinese agamas, which usually have translations of almost all the suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya. And there's no other parallel to the sutta in any other collection of literature from the early Buddhist schools. And also the sutta uses some terminology which in Pali seems to be a little bit later from the period of the very early discourses. It seems that we're moving in this sutta towards somewhat more technical treatment of the teaching. In fact, I see this sutta to be almost a transitional teaching between the old stratum of the Sutta Pitaka and the style of analysis and elaboration that will become crystallized in the Abhidharma systems. And it's also significant that the sutta centers around praise of Venerable Sāriputta and an explanation of Venerable Sāriputta's path to enlightenment, the way in which he contemplated in order to reach the final realization of the teaching. And some of you may know that Sāriputta is credited as being, in a sense, the father of the Abhidharma system, even though most schools ascribe the Abhidharma to the Buddha himself, but they consider Sāriputta to be the one who sort of organized and elaborated the Abhidhamma. And we can see in this sutta some features of analysis that will become even more refined, more elaborate in the Abhidhamma. Okay, so turning to the text of the sutta, you can see that the sutta is actually ascribed to the Buddha himself, since it's said that it occurs when the Buddha was living in Savatthi at Jeta's Grove, and it's given as an address by the Buddha to the monks. And it begins with the Buddha praising Sāriputta. And so maybe first we should explain, for some people who are fairly new to the Dhamma, who was Venerable Sāriputta. Now, it's said that all of the Buddhas have two chief disciples. And so our Buddha, the Buddha Gautama or Shakyamuni Buddha, also had two chief disciples. And those two chief disciples were Sāriputta and Moggallana. Moggallana specialized in what we would call miraculous powers, supernormal powers, psychic powers, the ability to multiply his body, to travel through space, to dive in water, to pass through walls, to make his body larger, smaller, and so on. And Sāriputta's specialization was in wisdom, insight, or deep understanding of the Dhamma. Sāriputta and Moggallana, even before they encountered the Buddha, they had been friends from boyhood. They had been very close friends. And then when they reached maturity, they both decided at just about the same time to go seek a path to enlightenment. They came from Brahmin families, but they became at an early age, disillusioned with their position of privilege, the easy life to which they had access. And they realized that as human beings, we all have to grow old, decrepit, die, and then take rebirth elsewhere. And so they thought, rather than just enjoy life, enjoy the wealth of our families, let us together seek a path to liberation. And so together they traveled all over India, seeking out different gurus or spiritual masters, until they came back to the state of Magadha, the city of Rajagaha, without really being satisfied with any teacher. Then they became pupils of one of the teachers who was living near Rajagaha, named Sanjaya. They weren't really satisfied with his teaching, but they just decided to accept him as their teacher. Then one day, when Sāriputta was traveling around, he saw a monk who was walking very calmly, very peacefully on alms round. And this monk was one of the first 5 disciples of the Buddha, named Assaji. And so as soon as Sāriputta saw him, he thought, that one knows. Because he could see from his manner, so calm, all of his movements, very mindful, very peaceful. He seemed to be fully aware of every step he was taking. So Sāriputta followed him till he saw that this monk, after completing his alms rounds, went off to take his meal. Sāriputta waited till he finished his meal. Then Sāriputta came up to him and said, "Who are you? Who is your teacher? What is the teaching that you follow?" And then this monk, Assaji, said to Sāriputta, he said, "My name is Assaji, and I'm a disciple of the prince of the Sakyan clan, who left the household life and became enlightened. And so now we call him the Buddha." And Sāriputta said, "What is the Buddha's teaching? What is the essence?" And Assaji said, the monk Assaji said, "I'm just," even though he was a fully enlightened arhat himself, but he said, "I'm just a student of the master. I can't really explain it in great detail." But Sāriputta said, "I don't need details. Just tell me the essence. Express it as clearly and concisely as you can." Then Assaji replied with just a verse of 4 lines. He said, "Whatever things there are that originate from a cause, the enlightened one has explained the cause, and he's also explained what is their cessation." That is the teaching of the great ascetic. And as soon as Sāriputta heard this verse of 4 lines, there arose in him what is called the eye of Dhamma, the vision of the Dhamma. That is, his insight penetrated right through to the ultimate truth of the Buddha's teaching. And he became a stream enterer, that is, one on the first stage of enlightenment. Then, after reaching the first stage of enlightenment, he went to find his friend Moggallana and told him, "I found the path to liberation." And Moggallana said, "What is it? Tell me the essence." And Sāriputta told him about this meeting with the monk Assaji. And then Sāriputta repeated the same 4-line verse. And as soon as Moggallana heard the verse, boom, he also reached the first stage of enlightenment. And so then the 2 of them together, they knew that the Buddha was living in the bamboo grove. So the 2 of them came to see the Buddha at the bamboo grove. And as they were approaching, the Buddha was giving a discourse to the monks. And when the Buddha saw them coming in the distance, he told all of the monks, "Do you see that pair of young men who are coming here? Those will become my 2 chief disciples." And so the 2 young seekers came to the Buddha, bowed down to him, and asked to be admitted into the order of monks. And then the Buddha told them, "Come and live the spiritual life for the full liberation from suffering." And so in this way they were admitted into the order, into the Sangha. Then after their ordination, they received some further instruction from the Buddha. Then the 2 of them went off to practice in solitude. And Moggallana practiced very diligently for 1 week. And after 1 week, he achieved the final goal, arahantship. But Sāriputta had to practice longer. He had to practice diligently for 2 weeks to reach the final goal. And so maybe the question comes, if Sāriputta is the one who's foremost in wisdom, why did it take him 2 weeks to reach the final goal, where it only took Moggallana 1 week? Maybe to use an analogy, maybe it's like, okay, 2 boys go to college, and one of them is very clear about that he wants to go into business, and so he takes a quick course of maybe business management. He starts off, in the freshman year, taking economics, whatever he needs, statistics, mathematics, then goes into business courses. And so maybe 3-4 years, then he gets his bachelor's degree. But he has a very narrow focus. He just knows business administration. So he gets his degree. But the other student wants to become very widely learned. He doesn't want just a narrow specialization. So he has, a very wide range of interests. He wants to know everything about world history, philosophy, world literature. Maybe he wants to study several languages, French, German, Italian and Japanese, Chinese, and maybe dabble in a little sciences, some courses in physics, biology. So maybe it takes him 6 years to finish his bachelor's degree. But when he finishes, he'll have a much wider knowledge, and maybe on that basis he can go on for his master's degree and his PhD. And when he finishes his PhD with such a wide body of learning, he can get a job in McDonald's or Walmart. While his friend who gets the business degree becomes a millionaire at the age of 25. I'm only joking. Okay, but it's said that Sāriputta, in order to become the one who's foremost in wisdom, had to explore and investigate a much wider range of phenomena and master many different areas of insight realization. Okay, so now this sutta is going to tell us the particular type of practice that Sāriputta undertook in order to achieve arahantship. And so the Buddha begins the sutta with praise of Sāriputta. So he starts by saying that Sāriputta is wise. Actually, the Pali word is pandita, which is, if you know the Indian word pandit, which has become, it's acquired in modern English something of a derogatory connotation, like somebody who thinks he's very smart, or like the experts that you see on TV, the talking heads on the news programs. But originally in ancient India, the word pandita meant somebody who is very learned, erudite, and capable of making wise decisions. So Sāriputta is wise. He's somebody who has great wisdom, mahapanyo. Somebody who has wide or vast wisdom, because he's comprehended a great number of subjects. Sāriputta has joyous wisdom, like when he's developing insight, he's experiencing these insights with joy and delight. Sāriputta has quick wisdom, java-panyo, speedy wisdom, rapid wisdom. That is, he comprehends very quickly. And Sāriputta has keen wisdom or sharp wisdom, tika-panyo. That is, he understands things very precisely, very clearly, very lucidly. And then Sāriputta has nibbedika-panyo, penetrative wisdom, that whatever he investigates, he pierces it through, penetrates it with his insight, with his wisdom. It's like his wisdom, if you present him with any subject, any field for investigation, it's like, maybe like a tangled mass of bamboos. But Sāriputta uses his wisdom like a machete knife, just cutting right through that tangle of bamboos and cutting through and creating a clearing. So Sāriputta is able to penetrate any subject that he's investigating. And then the Buddha says, during half a month, Sāriputta gained insight into states one by one as they occurred. And when the Buddha is speaking about this half a month, he's referring to the 2 weeks in which Sāriputta practiced insight in order to reach the stage of arahantship. And the phrase that Venerable Nyanamoli had rendered insight into states one by one as they occurred. I'll write the Pali for this expression on the board, and then I'll explain it directly off the Pali. Okay, the expression is Anupada Dhamma Vipassana. Of course, now Vipassana means insight. Dhamma means, in this case, it means phenomena, the factors of experience, the factors of bodily and mental experience. And Anupada, this is a rather unusual term. Pada also means a state or a factor, and anu has the sense of according to. So literally it would be something like insight into dhammas, insight into phenomena, maybe according to the nature of the factors. I'm just sort of speculating or guessing the meaning of this term based on an analysis of each component of the expression. It's a term that I think occurs only in this sutta. And so it seems to be, one gets the impression that it's an experiment with a new term that just never caught on. But now the Buddha is going to explain how Sāriputta's insight into states one by one as they occurred. So he's going to explain this insight into states one by one as they occurred. And so from the explanation, we can get some idea of what is meant by this expression. And the basic scheme will be that Sāriputta entered into each of the higher meditative attainments, the 4 jhanas, then the formless attainments, then the 9th attainment, which is called the cessation of feeling and perception. And then he investigated each one in terms of its constituent factors. And so Sāriputta's mode of practice combines the 2 elements of Buddhist meditation, that is, calmness or tranquility, samatha, and insight, vipassana. Or else we can call them combining the 2 components of samadhi, or concentration, and panya, or wisdom. And so those of you who have been studying Buddhism and practicing for some time, you know that there are 2 sort of wings of Buddhist meditation. So we call these serenity and insight. The practice of serenity involves choosing a single, usually very simple object, and then focusing the mind exclusively on that object until the mind settles upon that object and all other thoughts, distractions, the play of emotions subsides, and the mind can just settle into that object and become increasingly absorbed in it. As the mind becomes more and more absorbed in the object, then the various hindrances or mental obstructions subside. Usually the texts classify the obstructions to concentration in terms of the 5 hindrances. We have the hindrance of sensual desire, the hindrance of anger or ill will, the hindrance of dullness and drowsiness, the hindrance of restlessness and remorse, and then the hindrance of doubt. So the initial stage of practice along the road of serenity is to overcome the 5 hindrances, and this is done by keeping the mind focused upon a single, usually very simple object, like the in and out breathing, or sometimes a colored disc will be used, which they call the kasina object. So one just keeps the mind focused on that object until the play of wandering thoughts becomes, or distracted thoughts become stilled and subsides. But one is still using the factor of thought, which is called vitakka, applied thought, to keep the mind on the object. So if one is doing mindfulness of breathing, one is just aware, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. If one chooses, for example, the blue disc as the object of concentration, one will just be focusing on that disc, blue, blue, blue. Any other thoughts come to the mind, let them go, and just bring the mind back using that function of thought to direct the mind to the object, the in and out breath, the blue disc, or whatever other object one has chosen. Okay, so as one does this, over time the distracting thoughts subside, and then a particular type of mental image will appear representing the object, and one continues to focus on that image until at a certain point the mind becomes completely immersed in that object. And that first stage of a complete immersion in the object, whereas it seems that even the distinction between mind and object has sort of faded out, this is the first jhana, the first stage of meditative absorption. And now this stage is not particularly unique to the Buddha's teaching, but in any kind of meditation system, whether coming from other religions or even without any religious basis, where one just focuses upon a single simple object, it's possible for the mind to become so deeply absorbed, deeply focused upon that object, that the mind will move on to a different level of experience, from the level of our ordinary day-to-day sense-based experience to a level of experience where there's just no disturbance at all by any of the distracting thoughts, disturbing emotions. And so many practitioners from other systems take this state to be like a unification with the Absolute, or to be a state of unity with God, or realization of the ultimate. But what the Buddha's teaching, what the Buddha teaches, is that this state of mental absorption is just a state of mind, a state of consciousness, which has been brought into being through effort, diligent practice. It's a state of mind that is constructed by volition. And if one examines that state of mind, one turns the mind back on that state and investigates it, one sees that it is constituted of a constellation, a multitude of distinct mental factors. And so this is what Sāriputta did in his practice of the jhana. That is, he first attained through the practice of samatha, serenity meditation, concentration. Through that practice, he attained the first jhana, and then he turned the mind back on that jhana, sort of reflectively examining it. And that marked the beginning of vipassana, of insight, gaining insight into the nature of this experience. Okay, so the text tells us that Sāriputta, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome mental states, entered upon and abided in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So this describes that state of jhana itself. And in that state of jhana, you could see we have 4 factors mentioned in this description. There is the applied thought, that is the vitakka, which directs the mind onto the object. There's something called sustained thought, which keeps the mind anchored on the object, or metaphorically rubbing the object, or which keeps the mind anchored on the object. And then that experience of jhana is very joyful, ecstatic. So it's said to have rapture, and it's accompanied by a very blissful feeling, very pleasant feeling, which is called sukha, pleasure, or perhaps even better would be bliss, rapture and bliss, born of seclusion. Okay, so that is a description of the jhanic state itself. But now the Buddha is going to go on to explain what Sāriputta did when he attained the jhana. He says that the states in the first jhana I'm going to skip over the states now. We just jumped down to these states were defined by him one by one as they occurred. And now, what are the states that Sāriputta saw within the first jhana? And here we have a listing of the different mental factors that occurred within that experience. First, we have a listing of the 5 primary factors within the jhanic state. There is applied thought, that is the mental factor that has the function of directing the mind onto the object or applying the mind to the object. And then we have vichara, translated here as sustained thought. But maybe I would use now examination. That is the factor that is looking at the object or examining the object. Then we have the rapture, because it's a very joyful or ecstatic experience. The pleasure or bliss, and the unification of mind, because the mind is just one-pointedly fixed upon that object. Then Sāriputta examined in more detail, and he saw 5 factors present in that experience. First, there is contact, since within the jhana what is taking place is a contact between mind and the object. And so it's a very subtle process or act by which the mind is touching the object. In fact, contact is present with every experience that we undergo. Like when I'm sitting out here looking at you, then my mind is making contact with this whole visual field of people sitting at seats with tables in front of them. So in order for seeing to take place, there has to be the contact between mind and the object. If I'm going to be, say I have a red kasina, so I'm not looking at multiple objects, but I'm just focusing the mind on a red circle. Even to the point where I become fully absorbed in that. But still the mind is touching that red circle. So that mental touching is contact. Then there is a feeling. In this case, it's that blissful feeling or pleasant feeling. There is a perception. One is perceiving the object. If one is looking at, say, a classroom of other people, one is perceiving the classroom. At times, perception will have different focal points. So now I'll be focusing maybe Venerable Sagar Akantu, then I might look out in the back at Kaidi. Kaidi. I always get Kaidi mixed up. And maybe I look at in the front again, I see Johnny. Okay, so different perceptions, different people. But on any occasion, there's some perception. And perception, feeling, contact, they all work together, but they're distinct factors. And then there is some volition or intention. So here on any occasion of experience, there's some volition, some intention. So now, when I'm speaking, every sentence that I say, that I speak, there has to be some intention to speak that sentence. Otherwise, if I let all intentions to speak drop away, but then I have the intention to sit quietly in my seat. But then everybody will get angry with me and complain that we came to this class and Bhante just sat in the seat quietly. So I have to stir up the intention to speak. Okay, but even in the jhanic state, in every jhanic state, from the first all the ways up to the last, there's some intention, some volition, the volition to be in that jhanic state. And then, of course, there is the citta, that is, mind or consciousness. And then there are some other mental factors that are present. So we have here mentioned, these English translations, not perfectly satisfactory. Zeal, or I would render this as chanda, desire, like desire to be in the jhanic state. This is not craving, it's not attachment, but it's just to do any action, one has to have some desire to perform that action. So even to be in the jhanic state, even the higher jhanic states, there has to be some desire to be in that state. So that is what's translated here as zeal. Some decision, adhimokkha, or resolution to be in that state. Then there is energy, which is empowering the state. There is mindfulness, because mindfulness plays an instrumental role through the whole process of meditative development. Then there is equanimity here, which is not the equanimity of neutral feeling, but this is the equanimity of mental balance, because the mind is held, in order to enter the jhana, the mind has to be held in a very balanced state. Not too much. The energy shouldn't be tend towards excitation or excitement, nor should the energy be too loose, too slack. But there has to be a balance in the level of energy, a balance in the effort. And so that balance of all of the factors is what is here called equanimity. And then there is attention, that is the factor by which the mind is turned to the object. So if some of you have studied the Abhidhamma, you could see here how this passage is similar to the way in the Abhidhamma text we take every state of consciousness and then break it down into its constituent factors. Okay, so here what Sāriputta has done is to take the jhana. It's a state of mental unification, but within that unification there is multiplicity, diversity. That is, many mental factors working together. And what is the purpose, the function of seeing the jhana as a multiplicity of factors like this? What is the benefit? Say again?
You see it as a conditioned state, which is
Okay, that's good. One sees it as a conditioned state. Any other aspect?
I think that
Okay, yeah, that's good. I think there are two things that you indicated there. One is that it makes one dispassionate towards the factors themselves, and also it helps to sort of dissolve what you might call identification with that experience as being a self. And so, one of the reasons that we grasp the idea of self, or the idea that there's a real I, a truly existing I, or in the Chinese, 我, or 善见, I think it's called, the view of a truly existing self, identity view, is because we don't see, we have this perception of ourself as being a unity, some kind of self-subsistent whole. But when we look at our experience with the eye of wisdom, then we see what is going on at any time that we're aware. Even in our day-to-day life, there's a whole bunch of different factors working together. There's feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness working together. Okay, so that we could see that in our ordinary experience, but also at these very elevated states of experience, the jhanic states. There's also a bundle of factors. And so when we see this experience as a bundle of factors which arise through various conditions and which just exist together through that experience, then it sort of breaks the self-identification with the experience. Okay, but now Sāriputta continues further with his investigation. He sees these states, Anupada vipassana, Anupada Dhamma vipassana, that is, he analyzes the experience into a bundle of mental factors, each with its own nature. And he defines them one by one. And then further, it said, known to him, those states arose, known they were present, known they disappeared. Maybe we should say, to use normal English word order, those states, he knew those states as they arose, he knew them as they were present, he knew them as they disappeared. And then he understood, so indeed, these dhammas, these states, these phenomena, not having been before, come into being, and having been, having come into being, they vanish. So what is being indicated here by this passage? Exactly. Where did it come from? You said it? Okay. So this is the insight into impermanence. It's also called sometimes the insight into arising and passing away. Sometimes udayabhaya. So before Sāriputta entered the jhana, those factors of jhana were not present. He enters the jhana, all of those factors come into being. While he's present in the jhana, those factors continue. When he emerges from the jhana, those factors come to an end. So he's seeing now impermanence, arising, persisting for some time, passing away. And in fact, even within the jhana, what is actually taking place at a micro level is a succession of individual states of consciousness or individual frames of consciousness. It's just like maybe watching a movie. You know, when we watch the movie, we see the cowboy gets on his horse and goes riding into the sunset, and it looks like, you know, the same cowboy on the same horse riding into the same sunset. But if we get curious and we go back into the projector room, and we take the film and unroll the film, and what was that cowboy movie we were watching? We see that it's really a succession of frames. You know, in one frame the cowboy is here, next frame he's here, next frame he's here, next frame the leg is lifting, next frame the leg is in the spur of the horse. And then we see a whole series of frames where the horse is going boop, 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 boop. But then when we put it onto the projector and get it rolling, then it looks like same cowboy on the same horse riding into the same sunset. And so when lux was insight into the experience even of the jhana, one sees it's a series of different acts of consciousness going very, very quickly. And so one gets the impression that it's just one continuous experience. But because Sāriputta had very, very sharp wisdom, he was able to sort of put his mind into the divisions between the different citas making up the jhanic experience, and see how each one arises, stands, and passes away. And so he gets this insight. He understood thus, these states not having been, come into being, having been, they vanish. Then regarding these states, he abided unattracted or unattached by craving or attachment to them, and unrepelled by them, even though they were impermanent, but he didn't feel angry or upset by them. He dwelt independent, detached, free, dissociated, with a mind rid of barriers. And then he understood that there is an escape or a release beyond. In other words, he understood that even this first jhana, which is so joyful, so blissful, so relatively peaceful, is not the final stage. And so now he understands that there is some superior state beyond that. And then he continued his practice in order to achieve the state beyond that. At this point, I'll ask whether there's any questions. So this takes care of the first Sāriputta's practice with regard to the first jhanic state. Okay, this gentleman in the middle, and then Katie. Use the microphone.
Could you please, repeat what you were saying about Udayavaya and Samudayavaya?
Yeah, these terms mean Udaya or Samudaya means arising, origination, and Vaya means vanishing, disappearance. So those are the two primary stages that mark impermanence, that what hasn't existed before comes into being, then it persists for a little while, then it vanishes. And so when one sees arising, vanishing, that becomes the insight into impermanence. Okay, this gentleman with a blue coat. And
is there an intention in this teaching to inspire the listener to enter into these states by knowing the factors involved, inspiring the listener to try to bring these factors to bear in their own consciousness in an effort to enter into the jhanic state? Is there that intention?
I say that of course that's definitely the case, but I think it also shows not simply to inspire one to enter into the state, but also how one contemplates that state with insight in order not to be sort of swept away by misinterpretations of that state. Wait, take the microphone. Johnny? First row. Okay. Please, you can take the microphone.
I don't know how to do this.
Do you know?
Bhante,
Yeah.
thank you for explaining the process whereby Sāriputta entered into the jhanic state. I was wondering if you could add a little bit more regarding the focusing on the object, becoming immersed in the object, and then transitioning to the next stage where insight can occur. If you can please just expand a little.
More on focusing on the object?
Yes. How do you transition from focusing on the object to the point where further understanding can appear other than just looking at the object?
Okay.
I don't know if...
Okay, I think I get... So how does one make the transition from the stage of simple, let's call it simple one-pointed focusing on the object to the investigation with insight?
Right. How does one access more information?
Okay. Okay, here we get into a little bit of a controversial area. I'm not so sure whether we'll go into this. Okay, I'll explain according to the mainstream way of understanding. Now, within the jhana itself, one cannot actually investigate the factors individually. This has to be done by emerging from the jhana, so that the mind is not completely absorbed in the object, but one is still, we'd say, basking in the afterglow of the jhana. In other words, the mind is still very concentrated, but now it's able to use the factors of investigation, of examination more effectively. Because in the jhana, the mind is just completely absorbed on the object. The mind is completely focused on the object. And so one is undergoing the experience, but one is not able to investigate or distinguish its aspect. So one emerges from it, but with the mind still very calm, very settled, very wieldy, very wieldy, so that one could use the mind according to one's wish. And then one looks back at that experience and one investigates what was present in that experience. And generally what I find to be the easiest way analyze all of these factors can be rather difficult. But the way that's more sort of approachable is to take it in terms of the 5 aggregates, to take it in terms of, let's put the physical form aside, but in that experience one has a feeling, one had a feeling. So one knows one had the feeling of pleasant feeling, the blissful feeling. One knows that one was perceiving something within that experience. And so one can clearly, comprehend the object of one's perception, the act of perception. And one had the experience of the volition that was present. And so in the experience, volition was present. And so when one turns back on it, one can see that volition was present. And then one knows that consciousness, during that experience, one was conscious. And so one can reflect back on the consciousness that was present in that experience. And so in this way, one is examining the experience in terms of, now we have 4 of the aggregates, and now within the experience as well, the body was present. So that is the aggregate of bodily form. So in this way, one gets all 5 aggregates into that experience. And if one has a sort of more refined development of the jhana, then one can investigate it in terms of the jhana factors mentioned here. Even just taking the first 5, which are the applied thought, sustained thought, the joy, the blissful feeling, and the one-pointedness of mind. Okay, go away. Take Johnny has the microphone.
Bhante, what you just explained was made according to the mainstream of understanding, right?
Yeah.
But from the sutta itself, I really cannot see that Sāriputta emerged from the jhana in order to investigate all those factors. If we read the sentence, the mental factors or the states were defined by him one by one as they occurred.
Yeah.
So, and also there's paragraph later on indicate that Sāriputta really emerged from the meditative state.
Yeah.
So what I really like, because this issue has been confused me for a long time, what I really want to know from Bhante is just simply from the sutta itself, can you tell, just ignore the mainstream of understanding, but I think the mainstream of understanding comes from maybe Visuddhimagga, but my question is, according to the sutta itself, what would your comment be? That this is the first question. The second is, does the position that one emerges from the jhana and then contemplate the states later on, as stated in the Visuddhimagga, have any sutta support? I'm sorry to ask these questions because it's been years, and because this is a very crucial point how one practices with the jhana. So I just like to know the answers to my 2 questions.
Buddha, will you answer? I have to say, it's when I was going to answer this lady's question, I said this is a rather controversial area. And I said I'd like to avoid that, and so I'll explain according to the mainstream. But now you've opened up the controversy. Yeah, okay, I know your point. it seems to me also that if one looks at the sutta on its own terms, it seems to be saying that the investigation takes place within the jhana itself. But one thing where Nyanamoli translates one, he defined it one by one as they occurred. Now in the Pali, there's nothing that corresponds to the expression as they occurred. It's I wrote the word Anupada Dhamma Vipassana. It's insight into Dhammas. Anupada is rather obscure. According to the state. So one shouldn't be misled by that expression. Though I do admit, even if one takes out as they occurred, it seems to me that according to the text, Sāriputta is analyzing the jhana in terms of those factors within the jhanic experience itself. That's the way it seems, but I have to say, I don't see how it's possible, according to my understanding of jhana, to be undertaking an investigation like that while one is in the jhanic state. It may seem possible in the first jhana because applied thought and sustained thought is there. But say one comes to the fourth jhana, or the formless attainments, where we have the same expression here. So I will go along with, I have to go along with the commentary on this. That it seems to me to be correct. Did you want to add something to this, Katie? You have to turn it on, or?
So I was thinking three things. One, exactly what you were saying about fourth jhana. At a certain point, there's an experience that doesn't feel like there's agency there, personal agency. And at that moment, simultaneously, there can be insight, something experiential, but that doesn't have a component of agency, thinking or planning or investigating. And second, when that ceases, when the passing away occurs, it's incredibly natural for my agency, myself, my mind to come back and start asking very reasonable questions. What was that? What was that? And it, as I think you were saying, it will replay the experience or attempt to replay something that was experiential, but it'll attempt to form an understanding of it. And I find that that's where the commentarial comes in of trying to explain. And then third, I find the sincerity of Fowey's question about technique so wonderful and difficult. I think a lot of us, myself included, go through or experience that difficulty of which way is right, which way to do this, how to get this right. But I find personally that both explanations are correct, but the challenge of words and re-explaining something that is personal and interior, but not personal, kind of a shared mental experience. Bhante, who should I have said this?
If there's comments further to this issue, rather than questions on another topic. Okay, I think Bowei wants to say something further.
Bhante, I'm sorry. After this, I'll forget about this issue. Is it possible that the sustained thought and applied thought in the second jhana just refer to the the mental function in related to the meditation object?
In the first jhana, you mean?
In the second. Or even in the first or the
second?
Because
in the second jhana, there's no initial thought and sustained thought.
Yeah. So in the first jhana, and so it just refers to the meditation object only. So when in the second jhana, when a practitioner doesn't have sustained thought and the applied thought, that refers to the meditation object only. That means when his concentration, the level of his concentration has reached to that stage that no sustained thought or applied thought are needed anymore. But he is not. He still can have investigation into other factors. Is it possible that it's not possible to accept this kind of interpretation? So sustained thought.
I understand what you're saying. To myself, it doesn't seem possible.
It's not possible.
I didn't say it's not possible. I said to myself, it doesn't seem possible.
And the reason is?
Because it seems to me that to be able to distinguish the state into the factors and to know each factor, individually, requires a certain exercise in we call vitakka vichara, thought and examination, that wouldn't be possible in a state in which those are absent.
Thank you.
That's the way I understand it. Okay, Dina, and
Hi.
Richard after.
It seems to me that by the time you're in the second jhana, it doesn't even occur to you to think about what's happening. It's just you're one with what's going on. So if you started to investigate and think about it, you'd no longer be there. I mean,
yeah, that's the way it seems to me.
Yeah, it comes much after. Oh my gosh, I was there.
Yeah, there are three sets of terms that run through the whole thing, right? I mean, the first set, which in paragraph 4 is applied thought, sustained thought, rapture, pleasure, unification. That's the variable, right? Those are the 5 variables, and each jhana and each base state, right, has a different combination of presence or absence of those. Now, contact, feeling, perception, volition, and mind is a constant. Those are the aggregates, right? Isn't contact the same as rupa? Its form? No.
Contact is not explicitly in the suttas. Contact is not explicitly included amongst any of the 5 aggregates.
It's not, but
it's in the Abhidhamma system. Then contact gets put into the 4th aggregate, the aggregate of mental formations.
So then volition, is that mental formations?
Volition also is in mental formations, yeah.
So, but that's the set that's repeated through all 8, right? Why is that the set that's repeated, right, rather than the aggregates then? And why should, if contact and volition are duplication, right, what's being left out and why is that being duplicated?
At first, contact and volition are not the same thing. I said that in the Abhidhamma, they're both put into the aggregate of mental formations.
Yeah.
But they're 2 different factors.
Okay.
Okay, it seems to me, this is maybe another reason why I suspect the sutta being a little bit later. It seems that here a new way of looking at experience is being introduced to go along with this older scheme of the 5 aggregates. In this scheme, they're taking 5 factors which partly correspond, or mostly correspond to the aggregates, but we have here, but all of them in this scheme are mental factors. So we have contact, feeling, perception. Okay, so contact in the old aggregate scheme doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
Then feeling, of course, is the same as the aggregate of feeling. Perception is the same as the aggregate of perception. Volition is the main factor in the aggregate of mental formations.
Yeah.
And then citta, or mind, comes to be identified with the aggregate of consciousness.
Yeah.
And so here we have 4 factors which correspond to 4 of the aggregates.
Yeah.
But the rupa, or form, is not mentioned in this scheme.
Yeah.
And now, in the suttas, contact is often mentioned, even though it's not assigned a distinct place in the 5 aggregates, but it's often mentioned as the condition for feeling, perception, and volition. And so contact, because it's mentioned so often in the suttas, it comes to be included in this scheme of 5 mental qualities.
Okay, but isn't contact with rupa? That is, it's kind of like saying it's treating all of the senses as forms of touch, right? It's like saying, okay, you see something. It's like, your eye is being touched by light from the thing, right?
It's using touch here metaphorically.
Yeah. Okay, but the reason I was thinking that contact was associated with rupa is because it's contact. The contact is contact with rupa or by rupa, right?
For the most part, but not exclusively, because there's types of mental contact in which the mind is contacting, or the mind is cognizing a purely mental object. In that case, the mind is making contact with, say, an abstract idea.
Right.
Say I have the idea of a unicorn.
Okay. So it's an image. In that case...
Okay, that's maybe a bad example because it's based on a visual impression. The square root of 3.
Okay.
Square root of 5. Okay, so here the mind is making contact with a purely abstract object. So there is a contact there of mind with the object, though rupa is not directly present either in the faculty, which is mind, or the object, which is the abstract idea, square root of 5. Of course, rupa is present as the body, the physical body, but that is not directly engaged in that contact. So contact is not the same. Contact doesn't necessarily imply the presence of material form.
All right. Then is it an equivalent of the term intentionality?
Contact?
Yeah.
No. Volition would be the equivalent of intentionality.
Well, no, I'm talking about in the phenomenological sense. That is, like in Husserl, what he means by intentionality, and the tradition of phenomenology and logic is simply
derived from Brentano. I would say that intentionality, in that sense, derives from the definition of any of the mental factors would be defined in terms of intentionality. Like perception, what is perception? It perceives, what does it perceive? It perceives red, white, blue, yellow, and so on. Volition, what is volition, or intention, what is volition? It wills, what does it will? It's volition in regard to form, sounds, odors, taste, tactile objects. Consciousness, what is consciousness? It cognizes. What does it cognize? It cognizes form, sounds, odors, taste, tactile objects. Yeah, so I would say intentionality in the phenomenological sense is implied by the definition of each of these mental factors.
Each?
Yeah.
All right.
So all mental acts are intentional in that sense. that any mental factor is a mental function in regard to an object.
Okay. Last, you have this set: zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. That's a constant set. Those six, they're all essentially mental virtues, right?
Or mental qualities.
Concentration, qualities of concentration. And they're constant through the whole thing. And what I'm wondering about them is, how come when you vary the elements of a jhana or a base, right, there's no variation in the mental qualities which are involved in putting one into that state? That is, those are constant in all 8 states.
Okay, those
right?
are constant in all 8 stages.
Yeah.
But let us say that they're constant in generic terms, in that they're in each one of those states, these factors will be represented. But the quality of the factors in the different attainments will be different according to the level of the attainment. In other words, I'll use his terminology: zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. In the first jhana, in the second jhana, will have a different quality than the zeal, decision, and so on in the first jhana. And similarly, when one goes to the third jhana, they become more subtle, more refined. The fourth jhana, still more subtle, more refined, and so on, all the ways up to the final stage. At each level, these factors become subtler and more refined.
Okay, thank you.
So it's like, maybe to give an example, if we have a whole bunch of maybe caps like this of different shades of red, from this is a little bit burgundy color, could be a darker red, the bright red like your scarf, is that a scarf? Or sweater, up to Katie's shirt is almost getting to be a reddish orange. So we say that they're all red, but they're different shades of red. And so say that here there's different shades: zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, attention. They're all present, but different shades. Okay, well, this will be the last question.
In Digha 16, the Buddha recounted an experience, a deep meditative state when he did not hear or see raging storms with thunder and lightning. So I wonder what level of jhana you have to be in order to gain such deep concentration that you no longer hear or see, raging storms with thunder or lightning. Is the first jhana strong enough to...
I think if there were raging storms and thunder, it would disrupt the first jhana. To know what state the Buddha was in at that time, I remember he says, but he was still percipient. So it was not the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling.
Yeah, he said, although remaining conscious, he did not hear or see raging storms. Thunder or lightning. So he remained conscious.
Yes. The word used is sanyi, which is related to sanya, perception. So it's perception, consciousness, they go together.
So like fourth jhana? Or?
The text is specify. No. So one would just have to guess. Excuse me?
Does anyone online have questions, or am I opening up?
Well, Oh, I see. There are people online.
Usually there are. But I don't have my computer open. I apologize. I just opened something up. I can't help.
There's a question online that's asking, is actually a statement, and the question is first jhana may not be a prerequisite of stream enterer?
Okay, this is where I have my opinion. And I actually wrote a paper on this, which they could probably find on the internet. It's called Jhana and the Lay Buddhist. I think it's available online. And my impression from many descriptions of the lay Buddhists in the Pali Canon is that they have reached the stage of stream entry, but they were not attainers of jhana. Or at least they were not, let's say didn't have mastery over the jhana so that they could attain it at will. Maybe they attained it briefly before going into stream entry, but they were not like regular meditative masters of the jhana so they could just sit down and enter it. Like we have Anathapindika, who is a businessman, Visakha, the laywoman who had many children, a household full of children, grandchildren. And yet they were able to become stream enterers through the power of insight, but one doesn't get the impression that they were jhana meditators. We can come back for further discussion since we have a little walk this time, let's make it 12:20. So we could come back for maybe half an hour discussion. And then I thought I would take this whole sutta today. We'll continue this. We won't have the class next week because there is a meditation course going on from starting tonight until next December 1st. I think next Sunday. But we'll continue with the sutta the following Saturday. That will be December 7th? Okay, December 7th. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. I guess we don't have the sheets here, but if you know, you can recite along with me. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichihetato vetantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, we could end with 3 bows to the Buddha, or half bows to the Buddha. So we could stand.
Bhante.